Christian, tell us about yourself.
Yeah, thanks for having me. My name's Christian. I'm one of the winemakers here at Treveri Cellars, along with my father. We're located in Yakima, Washington, and we produce handcrafted sparkling wines. I kind of grew up in wine through my father. He came to the United States in 1983 to start making wine for a company in Mattawa, Washington area called Longueuth Winery. So the Germans actually kind of invested first in the, before the kind of foreign investment that we've seen both domestically from California and outside in Italy and other places in Spain. The Germans said this is going to be a great wine growing region. So my dad made sparkling wine always on the side as a hobby and kind of came up with it and around with it. And he's been 40 plus years in the industry. So about 10 years ago, actually 12 years ago, we started this project, 10 years to the public, and he said, hey, I want to get back to the roots, to my roots. And European winemaking is kind of, more familial, kind of smaller. I'd like to go back to that, and I'd like to do sparkling wine. It always rubbed off that my grandmother, my Oma, she always lived the champagne lifestyle, had a glass of sparkling every night with dinner. And that kind of rubbed off on my dad. And he was able to do a degree in Germany in winemaking, and then sparkling winemaking, and also traditional winemaking. But the sparkling always stuck with him, and it kind of stuck with me too growing up in wine. I originally went to the University of Washington and started studying chemistry, and then I went and finished a finance degree at Seattle University, and then also did an enology down at UC Davis. So you could say I'm done with school. I don't
You took the scenic route.
Yeah, I did, yes, and I don't want to do school anymore, so now I just want to enjoy the fruits of the labor. We've been doing this 12 years. I've been in the wine industry personally about 15 years. I worked at Precept Brands before working on our own project here, which was a great wealth of knowledge to be working at another large producer in the state.
So did you notice any similarities in other wine producing regions when you settled on this spot? How did you know that this region could make such great sparkling wine?
Yeah, so I mean, when my dad came, in 1982, 1983, I think there was maybe 15 wineries in Hull, a couple of the older names in the industry, Chinook, Kiona. My dad got to know all of them, and you think originally when Washington got well known, it was Riesling. Riesling was the predominant thing that was coming out of Washington. So everyone assumed this was extremely cool climate production. Obviously, we've had warming and things, and different pockets and microclimates open up as things have warmed. But predominantly, I wouldn't say Washington is abundantly hot year round. This is not a Mediterranean climate by any stretch of the imagination. It's not southern France, for example. You showed up today overcast, 40 degrees, near freezing the night before. We had snow a couple times, and really there's only this kind of warm pocket in the summer. So we kind of have a cool spring and a cool fall typically, and the summer is warm, and without that warmth in the summer, we probably wouldn't get a lot of stuff right. The key is they hang the yield so low in the Yakima Valley on Bordeaux varieties, they can actually get something off of it, that kind of gives an indication, and if we look at the kind of general planting of the Yakima Valley AVA, it's about, it's more white grapes than it is red grapes. So, that kind of leans and gives an idea, okay, there's some potential for white wine making here in the Yakima Valley AVA with as many kind of microclimates that we have. There's a lot of things that lend itself well to Washington. People think of Eastern Washington, they think desert, they think Sahara. It's not what we have going on here. We kind of have a shrub steppe climate, so it's a little bit higher in elevation. We just have a rain shadow basically that sort of stops some of the moisture. So we were a little bit higher and had a little bit more moisture, probably look more like Spokane, than we would, kind of a shrub steppe environment.
So Christian, I've been a fan of your wines for many years. I actually served them in my restaurants, and it always amazed me that you're able to put such magic into these bottles at such an approachable price point. Tell us about your method.
Sure, yeah, so we do the traditional method. Typically traditional method sparklings are upwards of 50, 80, 100 bucks a bottle. Sometimes you can get away with a good value at 25. Most of our wines are positioned between $15 and $20. Part of that comes from my dad wanting to share our craft and what we're doing and the knowledge that he gained in Germany and in the United States. He's been making wine 40 plus years. So he kind of knows the nooks and crannies.
He's an outlier.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. He is definitely an outlier. He's not one of the new rebels. You'll never see him in an article for that. Well, what's really unique, I think, about our wines is we make them in the traditional method. So method champenois, method champagne, you undergo 2 fermentations, you know. And so that's, the bubble is natural. They get it from a fermentation in the bottle. And that's the unique thing about these wines and what we're producing at the price point is you don't see a lot of traditional bubble, traditional method bubbles available from $15 to $20 in the world, for that matter.
That's a real story. It's a real deal. I tell you, it's a labor of love, I'm sure.
It is, yeah. As many times as we touch the bottle, people say, well, how will you do it? You know, you have to be a little bit of a certain scale. So we produce about 20,000 cases a year. So we're not a large winery, but we're not, you know, small at like 5,000. So you have to have a little bit of scalability to it to get into kind of this price point range. But more than anything, you kind of have to know what you're doing and the wealth of experience that my dad carries. And obviously I've been in the industry 14 years or so myself. You know, you kind of have to use and lean on those experience and the changes every year to kind of produce a consistent product, especially sparkling wine that can vary so much by vintage.
Well, I tell you, so as wonderful and approachable as your wines are, why don't you tell us one little tip about how you best preserve a bottle if you're not going to drink the whole thing?
Yeah.
Because I think that's the one thing that sometimes keeps people from opening a bottle of champagne.
You bet. I mean, my first tip is consume more, enjoy more. Sparkling wine is there to be enjoyed. Don't save it for just an occasion. It goes wonderfully with food, as you well know. You know, you compare it with a lot of different things and people aren't thinking about it. So definitely think about it in that way. You can share a bottle over the night. You don't have to look to switching gears to a different wine. But you know, if you are going to consume a bottle and you want to keep it, there's 2 things that really come to mind, which is one, keep the bottle about half full. So the further down it goes, the more head space there is, you know, for that CO2 to release. So you know, if you only have about this much left in the bottle, you're probably not going to keep a lot of CO2 in there. So I would say if your thought process in mind is to keep some, you know, for the next day or the following day, try to shoot for about half the bottle, which equates to about 2 glasses, 2.5 glasses of wine. Once the cork and cage are off, there's a couple tricks that people do. One is you can stand a silver spoon upside down into the neck of the bottle and let it sit in the fridge. There's some studies about it. There's not a lot of clear evidence of why it does it, but it does. You know, there's something to do with the interaction with the gas and the silver. You know, that kind of keeps that sparkle into the bottle. The other piece is you can pick up, you know, here at the winery or other wine shops, a little stopper. They're usually about $4, and you can affix it to the top of the bottle, and you keep it up to 3 days in there with some bubbles and out, and you change it all. And if you buy, like, let's say a really expensive bottle, we have some of those. You can get those fancy systems. They're called perlage, and you can gas and keep it under pressure, and it'll keep those bubbles for almost, you know, an infinite time, you know, into the wine. But who wants to just use their bottles of sparkling as a museum piece? They're meant to be enjoyed and shared with one another.
Well, there you have it, folks. Christian Grieb, Treveri Cellars, one of the true treasures of the Yakima Valley.